Hey, Joe Gilder from Home Studio Corner. I want to do a quick A/B of what multiband compression sounds like against regular compression. In the last video, I talked about my 6 rules of compression. That predominantly applies to a regular compressor like this one. This is just the stock compressor in Studio One versus multiband compression, which is a kind of a completely different animal. Real quickly, here's the 60-second overview of what multiband compression is. First, regular compressors just compress the entire signal. Everything from 20 hertz up to 20 kilohertz. All the lows, mids, and highs, everything goes through the compressor. Okay? A multiband compressor is set up like individual compressors for each frequency band. This one I've got set up as a 3-band compressor, so the lows, mids, and highs get split up, and then each one has its own compressor. What that means is the lows don't affect the highs. There could be a whole lot of stuff happening in the low end, and that compressor is going to compress the low end, but all that activity is not going to affect how the mids and the highs are compressed. They're all compressed based on what's happening in their lane, right? In their specific band. Okay? Now, but what does that mean sonically? I mean, you might initially think multiband compression, well, that just sounds better, right? If the kick drum hits really hard on my drum bus, maybe I don't want that to affect the way the cymbals sound, right? That pumping that we've heard of. That's a bad thing, right? Well, it's actually, too much of anything can be bad, but I actually like the way the pumping sounds on drums. So let's demonstrate that. Here is a drum mix without compression on the bus. And here's regular compression on that drum bus. If we look at the gain reduction there, we're seeing it's mostly just responding to the kick and the snare. That's what's triggering the compression. But then the compression sound, the sound of that compression is affecting everything. One of the most obvious ways is the way it affects the cymbals. Listen to how the cymbals at the end of this fill, regular cymbals just sound like this. But when you've run compression on your drum mix bus, I can't say that, the kick drum triggers the compressor, which turns down everything, which in turn gives it this sort of sound that the cymbals are also being turned down. This is that pumping I was talking about. In moderation, when you don't go nuts with it, it actually can sound really cool and has come to become the sound we expect, especially out of like rock drums. So listen to that again with the compression on. Just a little bit of that cymbal just gets turned down. Not as dramatic as I just did with my mouth, but it gets turned down some, okay? Now let's switch over to the multiband compressor. It sounds wildly different, and one of the differences is the kick drum and the snare drum are not affecting the cymbals, so the cymbals just kind of chill out more. And you might think initially that sounds like, objectively, when I think about it, that seems like a better solution, but listen to what it sounds like. I'll play it without the compressor and then I'll turn it on. It's different, right? Very different. One thing you may note if you look in closely, these compressors have the exact same settings, same threshold, -30, ratio of 4:1, attack and release of 50 milliseconds each, and they both have a makeup gain of 4 decibels. So all you're hearing is the difference in how the compressor reacts to the audio. And to my ear, it's very different. Let's go back and forth. We'll go no compressor, first compressor, no compressor, second compressor. Okay, here we go. So while maybe the cymbals don't have as much pumping, a lot of other stuff is happening with the multiband compressor that I personally don't like. I love multiband compression, but not in this instance, and usually not in mixing sessions much at all. I'll use it for a de-esser. That's the subject of another video. But generally speaking, I might put it on over my entire mix if I think it needs it. But generally, it's more of a thing I reserve for mastering. But I wanted you to hear what's happening. The big things that I hear, the kick and the snare no longer sound punchy and snappy. That's because we divided them up. The kick drum consists of mostly low end, but also quite a bit of mid-range and a little bit of top end and that snap of the kick. We've taken that singular sound and divided it 3 ways, okay? Snare drum, kind of the same. There's a little bit of low end, a lot of mid-range, and a little bit of snap up top. Because those frequencies have been divided, the compressor's not responding. It's not one compressor responding to one kick drum hit. It's 3 compressors responding to the 3 different parts of a kick drum hit, and it doesn't give us the same sound at all. If anything, the overall kind of takeaway that I got from listening through the multiband was it brought up a lot of mid-range. Why is that? Well, the low end got compressed, but the mid-range didn't get compressed as much as it did before. If it's not being compressed as much, what does that mean? That means it's being turned up a little bit. So the lows, mids, and highs lose that same relationship they had before the compressor kicked on. Sometimes that's a pleasant thing. In this situation, I don't think it is, because it makes the drum sound messy and muffled instead of tight and punchy. Listen to it again. Now, compare that again to the original compressor. And again, these are just stock compressors, nothing fancy here. This top compressor here, I think, sounds infinitely better. This is what I love about mixing, especially when I do top-down mixing, which is what I do a lot of the time. It just gives me the ability to, look how much we've affected the kick, the snare, and the sound of the overall kit with one compressor. We can't do that as well with a multiband compressor. So anyway, hope that was helpful for you. At least opened your eyes. If you have a multiband compressor available to you, by all means, play around with it. There are some situations where it might work, but just know that we've been getting the job done with regular compressors for decades, and they are still a wonderful tool that sound amazing. Even if on paper it seems like multiband should be better, regular compressors still have a prominent place in your productions and mixes. All right, I'll let you hear these drums in context for the outro music. Thanks so much for listening. If you want more mixing tips from me, specifically how to go through a mix process from step 1, which is just getting started, to step 5, which is knowing when you're finished, I've got a 5-step mix guide that you can check out at 5stepmix.com. It's absolutely free. Thanks for watching. See you next week.